feel, that's that car right there, because the weather outside is very beautiful, and I just feel that we should probably be, if we could do a presentation in a car and let the wind hit us, that would be awesome too. But I just feel like, yeah, outside and enjoying the beautiful weather is a feeling for me. I like the car.
Today I feel like, also like the upper right, but because I think she's looking in a mirror, and I feel like today I'm very reflective. I'm very anxious today because several things have kind of gone not the way I anticipated they would, but in a self-reflective kind of manner. We do this kind of activity in our office with professional staff and a couple of our students, and we did something called healing cards this morning. And so we had a big cry fest earlier today. And, so I think I feel like I'm also feeling kind of vulnerable, but anxiety piece vulnerable, but now I'm like also looking in a mirror and trying to figure out what I want to do with that.
Thank you for sharing. And so these pictures can be changed up too. They could be pictures of Philadelphia. They could be pictures of Temple. Make it more personal. Things that the students can relate to very easily, very readily. And then maybe you progress to pictures that are completely random. That you have to make that little bit more of a stretch. And so being able to have our students think differently about what they're seeing and how they're feeling, and being able to identify that, I think, is really important. Any other last thoughts on this one?
Do the students love this?
They do. They really pick up on it. Yeah, and we do have cards. They are printed out. It's more tangible so that they can feel it and hold it. I mean, it's always funny when they both try to pick up the same card at the same time, and they have to negotiate who gets it first. And so that's always fun. And hearing how it's completely different. And we did that too. That it's completely different how we're interpreting this one picture and how we're making meaning of it, which is a great way to show different perspectives. So when there's a roommate conflict and you're really talking about the window being open and the temperature of our room, like really what's behind that. And so hearing those different voices, for sure. The next one is the MMDI, the multiple modes, the model of multiple identity development of identity. We just call it MMDI, so I always have to think of that acronym. I apologize. And again, challenge by choice.
One copy of each, or what?
They're all the same.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I'll wait to explain it until everyone gets one. So with this is talking about intersectionality and how our identities come together in different ways, and that allows us to make meaning of different things at different times in different ways. And so your core, this filled in black circle in the middle, if you look up to your top right, it's your personal attributes. It's who you are as a person. And so mine that would go in there are probably my strengths, so like my input, my achiever, relationship focused, vulnerability, that's at my core. And then all the circles, the axioms, are your social identities, which are there on the left. And depending upon your context, which is down at the bottom right there, so if we're filling this out as if we're at Temple, or if we're in Philly, or if we're at home, this can look different. So pick a context that you want to focus on, and then we plot our social identities within the axioms depending upon how salient to our identity they are. So the more salient they are, the closer to the axiom they are. So for me, my sexual orientation is closer to the middle, because that's something that's very prevalent and is salient to my identity. But my race, being white at Miami, I don't have to think about. And so that's towards the peripheral more. And so if you find one, like my age and my religion are kind of at the same level. They intersect each other. They don't really, it's expected that at this age I'm exploring my religion. And so they intersect very nicely and in a way that I really don't have to think about it much. And so if you can take a few moments and plot your social identities in relation to the axiom in your course, and then we can share that experience. You don't have to share where your personal identities are, but the experience, what it was filling it out. sorry, I didn't give it time for questions. Are there any questions about the activity? Sorry, I skipped that point. Maybe another minute to finish up. And so does anyone want to share what the experience of plotting their identity on this paper was like, and that experience?
For me, it made me, think about the different privileges that I have that are out there, and I guess the things that are further out from the core are things that I don't normally have to worry about, that other people may have to worry about. But the things that are closer in is something that I'm conscious of at all times due to, societal beliefs or just daily interactions that I have with friends, family, so on and so forth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think for me it was remembering the context I chose to use. Because I thought myself, I chose work, and I thought myself going more personal, like, personal life. And so it was definitely very reflective to see how that shifts based on the context, and kind of based on mind frame.
Yeah, and so putting that in with our residents, maybe that looks different in their history class than it does in their residence hall, than it does in the dining hall. And so figuring out what that means to interact with our identities in very different ways throughout one day, and being able to navigate that and those relationships with others, I think is important to remember, and to remember that I'm still figuring out what that means for me, and that looks very different. Thank you. Were there any identities that weren't on the left that you were hoping for? So for me, one is weight. Weight is very central to my identity, and it informs how I interact with everything. And so not seeing it on the left at the first time, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, so even when we're doing this work and trying to be very inclusive and understanding identity, knowing that we can't be everything to everyone all the time, and that we will be leaving something out. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and say that, rather than ignore that and pretend like we are being everything to everyone all the time. Because I think that's more harmful. And so for me, weight being on the side wasn't there for me. Is there any other ones that we can think of that maybe aren't represented?
Ethnicity is not on here.
Political beliefs.
Marital status.
Citizenship status.
Education.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's lots. Like there's lots that we can think of that are on here, which I think is great. And there's no way that we could represent all of them, and it would just be so intermixed because of the intersectionality. But I appreciate all those examples. Thank you. Any questions on that activity, or what that looks like, or how that goes with students, or anything like that? Okay. Again. And so entertaining some questions. These are some other tools that I've used that didn't have the time to go into all of them. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria is a fabulous book by Beverly Tatum. Read in my graduate work, and really goes into white identity development and black identity development and what that means and how they parallel each other, but how they deviate and look very different from each other at certain times. I cited it in my comms, I think 30 times. It was fabulous. Gifts of Imperfection, Brene Brown. Critical Race Theory, I just finished that book maybe 2 weeks ago, and it changed how I see everything now. And it's really interesting just how one book can completely shape the way that I'm viewing the world, and it's a really cool experience to be engaged in. OU, Ohio University, did a great poster campaign. I think it was last Halloween, and one of those is in the bottom right, and the tagline is, "I'm a culture, not a costume." And so they have a variety of different cultures represented and how they're stereotypically represented. So an Asian man with a bowl of rice and a bunch of math books or engineering books is how we would dress up as Halloween, and how that's a misappropriation of culture and how that's not fair. And going into that, there's tons of those. I can send you the links. If you search OU, I'm a culture, not a costume, they will all come up. They're great. The Genderbread Person, I brought copies because I love this resource. So if you'd like one, please take it and add it to yours.
I'll take it home.
Yeah, please. It's a really accessible way to talk about the differences and similarities of gender identity, expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. Again, knowing that we can't be everything to everyone, there are identities that are left off of this. And so if we look at sexual orientation, it goes from heterosexual to homosexual, with bisexual in the middle. There's no asexual. There's no pansexual. And so again, we're leaving identities out. But recognizing that, and as long as we can have that part of the conversation, it's a really good introduction to these 4 topics that can be very hard to understand and grasp if we're sitting at the privileged end in all of them. And so I really like it. I used it in an RA class that I was facilitating, and I really thought it'd be like a 15-minute conversation, and it was the entire class. Because they don't get to talk about these topics. They don't get to talk about trans identities, how gender expression is different from gender identity. They don't get, maybe sociology, do they get to talk about these issues? And so they loved that conversation, and it went so well. And there was so much respect and grace given to each other that it was really good. And so going back to the prompt, how do we use this stuff to serve the different populations of our students? I think with me, with the staff, it's really important for us to know ourselves and the work and our identities that we're approaching each other with. And so doing that with ourselves and our staff is important for me so that they can then facilitate those conversations elsewhere. Whether that be in the hall or a future in their life, I really don't care. Like, I would love for them to facilitate those conversations in the hall instantly, but knowing that that's not going to happen, if they're taking some of these skills with them, that's my hope, is that they, at some point, some of this stuff clicks for them. And for me, too, because knowing that I'm still working with them. So yeah, it's just great tools to be able to facilitate those dialogues, those conversations, and really isn't specific to any certain student population. Certain community. It goes with athletics, it goes with honors, it goes with international students, domestic students. It's really quite universal in the way that we're approaching the work. So are there any questions at this point? Anything you want to talk about more?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, in some of the prompts that you've used with students, such as this worksheet and the activity that you did prior to that, I guess and you alluded to some of this earlier, but how do you get the students to a point to where you know that they're being authentic and transparent with the responses that they're giving, and not giving responses that are just based off of their surroundings or what they expect to say it?
I think that's a great question. And I think some of it you don't know, and you have to trust the process a little bit for that. But I think it's in the beginning, getting to know my individual RA. So during our one-on-one conversations, making sure that I am getting to know them and their comfort level with me, and trying to diminish the power differential so that I can get to know them. Excuse me. Each one of our one-on-one interactions is vastly different. I have a student that's into cinematography and media and drama, and we always just naturally gravitate to YouTube. And so we get to YouTube, and that's how we connect. I have a student that's going into student affairs, and she's a list person. She comes in, she's an engineer right now, and she has a list of things she wants to check off, and so it's allowing them to interact with me the way that they want to, so that I can get to know them. I think that's one way. I think it's allowing for that grace, that forgiveness, and having these very difficult conversations, and allowing other people to have different perspectives, but understanding that your perspective has implications, and allowing for that. They've done really, really well with that. I think it is the relationship building in the foreground, in the beginning, that allows that to happen, and happen pretty organically throughout the semester. And then you start transitioning from the MBTI, from the true colors, into talking about, oh, well, that's really interesting. Like, did you hear him say that's so gay in the hall? What is that? So what are we going to do with that? And having those informal conversations in that way as well. And it doesn't always have to be structured. It doesn't always have to be so structured. And it shouldn't just be this structured environment that we're interacting with. It should be an approachable, accessible, everyday type conversation. Mm-hmm.
How does this dictate your work with like a larger population, so like with the hall itself?
Yeah. I think part of the way that I approach my work is through my RA staff, knowing that I cannot make connections with each and every resident, knowing that I'll recognize faces and know a majority of names. So for me, the RAs are the way to be able to implement this work, because they will know all of their names. They will have some sort of relationship with the vast majority of their residents. And so if I can get them thinking differently about the Harlem Shuffle or the Harlem Shake, when they see that on YouTube, or when they see their residents wanting to do it, they might think about it differently. If they're not willing to engage in that conversation with the students, it's getting them to a point that they are comfortable engaging in that. And so having those back pocket responses for when you hear that's so gay or that's retarded, that you have that back pocket response of, we don't appreciate that language in our community. That it's that simple statement until you're at a point where it's either appropriate or you're comfortable having the longer conversation, or that there's time for that longer conversation, because so often it's not. You hear those things in passing, and so it's preparing them to be able to confront those. It bleeds over into their bulletin boards, into their programming. And so Black History Month, during Halloween, they put up a bunch of those were a culture, not a costume posters, and having conversations about that. Feminist theory really informs the work right now, because I'm with 200 sorority women. And so understanding what that means, what it means, how are we talking to our women about walking home alone at night without it being victim blaming? How are we talking about what we're wearing and the clothing that we're wearing without it being victim blaming? That you should be able to walk around butt naked without being afraid of being sexual assaulted. But I want you to know why you want to walk around butt naked, right? Like why do you have the shortest dress on if you want to, and it's because that's how you're comfortable and you really like to dress and it's cute, cool, but I want you to know why it is you're choosing to engage in the behavior and the way that you're doing. And so that really comes through with the theory, with the conversations with my staff to their residents.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond this, thinking about yourself and thinking about, you had identified, right now you're a mammy, and then it's a different type of culture and an environment
Absolutely.
than Temple. And so what would be some anticipation of that transition, as well as what some of your own identities may change in the core because of the situation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and really hard to know before I get here. I think that being immersed in the culture is different than knowing about the culture, because I don't think that you're ever really aware until you get in the middle of it. And so that's really hard for me to answer, but it will be a transition, absolutely. Right now I'm working with a very homogenous, white, high SES student body that aren't willing or aren't able to recognize the systems in place. And I think it goes with the white guilt and with the privilege that they have, that they aren't willing to go there yet and aren't forced or prodded to go there. And so I think that would look very different at Temple in an urban environment where there's tons of diversity, social diversity, and diversity of all kinds. And I think that they get it differently, and they understand that privilege and the power dynamics very differently. And so it's really taking my cues from them, being able to be in the culture and figure out what it is that they need by asking those questions, by seeing what's going on, observing my environment, by relying on my peers of saying, this is what I just saw. What does this mean in this context? Until I can build that gauge in myself. Yeah, I think that will definitely be a transition, but one that I'm really excited for. I really enjoy identity work and having conversations and dialogue about identity and difference and power and privilege and systems and everything that goes into that. And so this is the next step in learning how to do that with a different student body.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As a campus partner, as the campus partner. Yes. And I'm like a spy, right?
I like it.
We only manage one here at a time.
What?
We only manage one.
Just, I just do everything. No, as the campus partner here, what do you see campus partnership looking like?
Absolutely. I think that it has to be mutually beneficial. I think say I have something that I want to partner with you on, I shouldn't just be expecting money. And you should
because we don't have it.
right. And you should be expecting more than your name on a poster. It should be this truly collaborative in a sense of, this is what I'm coming with, what are your thoughts? And valuing and validating your thoughts in that process to get to someplace new that I couldn't get to by myself. It's, so what do you want out of this? What is your goal in this program or in this event or in this whatever endeavor that we're having? It's building a relationship together. It's getting your offices, departments, divisions, whatever needs met, as well as my own. That it's not a escape of, well, I told my RAs they have to collaborate, and so they talk to you for 10 minutes. Like, that's not the point. It's really evaluating the effectiveness of collaboration, that you have a different perspective and a different lens that you're approaching your work with, that we are in Res Life, and how can we merge those two to build a better whole. Mm-hmm.
Well, so we have about 5 minutes, so if you have questions for the group,
Yeah, sure. I would really like to hear more about the collaboration piece. And so what does it look like? And not just for you, right? Like for everybody. So what does it look like?
What's it like collaborating with Heart?
We're not going to tell.
Yeah, so what's it like collaborating with different departments? How often does that happen? How does it look? What's that dynamic?
I think it depends on your position and what you're doing. I think we all collaborate with different offices, and so for the different purposes. And so for me, I collaborate with a lot with other services to support our staff, as well as advocating for our staff. And so student finances services, or career development center, or even Telemen Center, or just different resources. So, and often the collaboration is there in the sense of like understanding what the purpose is, and sometimes you have to explain that, or sometimes explain it in a different language because people are not in student affairs or their priorities are different. But I think it's always thinking about where, what is it that we need and how we can be able to advocate for our students and staff, and then being able to kind of mold what we need in a way that it will be a win-win situation for everyone.
As a campus partner, but I used to work for Res Life here.
Okay.
So I spent 2 years working with Chandrika's position, if you know Kirby, as the former Kirby, but migrated over to the Wellness Center. And so coming from the inside, I don't know if I'm biased in saying this, but Residence Life is like a rock star department, and really worth working with as a person from a different department. That being said, I think something that happens that makes sense that it happens for many reasons, and it's not Temple specific, with my department is that so we really kind of look at student behavior, right? And Chandrika's kind of like, I know what this is going to be. And then so my position specifically deals with high-risk behavior, right? So sexual assault, drinking issues, mental illness, suicidality, those kinds of things. That's kind of my specialty. And the problem that we then have is, like, specifically, like maybe an RA will say,
I'm having trouble on my wing with people smoking pot. Kate, come in and do a talk. Okay, well, we know that that's not shown to be effective, and I know that ResLife does good work and cares and knows the research and the data and is data driven here at Temple. That's not always the case. So I can speak to everyone in this room and everyone in this department in a way that says, like, really, who's going to come to this? Really?
Yeah.
But then it comes down to the RAs are still like, okay, but we're having problems with people smoking pot. Kate, come do a talk, right? And it's like, okay, neat. Like, again, like, what do you really want this to look like? And I think that the collaboration has to come from the top. Like, not that I need it to. I don't care if I'm talking to an RA or if I'm talking to a random student or if I'm talking to Kevin Williams. But it has to come from the expectations that the RDs set for the RAs working with other departments, because otherwise it's going to be, I have this problem, fix it. I have this problem, fix it. I have this problem, fix it. And we know that data supports time and time again that that does not change behavior for longer than 24 to 72 hours. So motivational speakers don't change behavior. They do not. And I can motivationally speak as much as you want me to. However, they're not going to stop smoking pot. In fact, they won't even attend the program. But I think that we've moved really in great strides with our two departments as we've both evolved. As I moved, there was a giant evolution in my department now, and there's been continued movement here. And I see this across the Division of Student Affairs with ResLife. And I think in collaborating on these multimodal, repetitive, regular, consistent message and data-driven programs. And so as an outside partner, I really relish the times that we're invited to participate in hall events, in campus-wide events, in residence hall-wide events, in initiatives like NCOW or Campus Safety Awareness Month, or whatever we were calling April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but whatever, enough is enough. And those options to say, like, or opportunities to say, like, we're all doing great work here, and here's my work specific to the behavior. Here's your work specific to living on campus and this population and these LLCs, and here's, leadership's work specific to this type of student, whatever, and kind of just saying, we're all doing great things. Let's get on the same page and make sure we're saying great things, and we're saying the same great things so that people can't act ignorant. And so I think that is what it has looked like. I've just named 3, like, large things. There's some other things that we've worked on. But as a campus partner who is called in a lot, I feel like having support from the new incoming RDs and all the RDs as I do now, with reminding the RAs, that's really neat. I know you want to have the Wellness Center come in and talk about your pot problem. Let's talk about really what you got to do, because it's really about enforcement. It's actually not at all about the messaging. The behavior in the halls really is about enforcement. It's about consistency of enforcement. It's about ensuring that one RA, when they're on duty, is really doing the rounds, as opposed to sometimes they're not and sometimes they are, because that's where the problems lie. And so, anyway.
Yeah.
Soapbox done.
No, that's cool. Thanks.
In a nutshell, we collaborate all the time. so yes, our RAs are consistently collaborating with other departments as well as we are.
Thanks for I'm really trying to ingrain this person, okay? I can infuse the culture as you get in here.
I love it.
Any final questions?
Maybe one, and it's kind of a doozy, and so if there's not time for it, that's cool, and we can email, and that's fine. The diversity on campus, what does that look like? Is it embraced and celebrated? How do we work with the different student populations to meet their needs?
Yeah, I mean, Temple campus has its own unique issues too. I don't think that you're going to see anything different from what you see at Miami University. It's still transparent across the nation, regardless if it's homogenous or not. I think sometimes that we rest on that title that we once had of being Diversity University, and that a lot of those conversations have sometimes in other areas have deceased. Or it's there because we feel that we have achieved that diversity, so I don't know if it's there as much anymore. Our department is different because we promote and we have excellence within that social justice and inclusivity realm, but I think that the students, we don't challenge them enough still, and just getting them back on the bandwagon of challenging them to think about their identity and others and how it impacts them. So it's a continued rest, because you can never achieve something and stop with it. You have to continue it going. So just, because I don't know if you know that we don't have a real multicultural center, and you probably have researched that. Yeah, and you probably, it came up with 0 results probably, or something. So there's a reason behind that. I mean, it shifted a few years ago into where it just programs out to staff and stuff. It was part of those initial budget cuts, unfortunately. So just having that and just ensuring that those departments are aligning themselves with different initiatives and stuff is something that we are continuously working with. So.
Yeah, I would echo Bonnie, and I will go further too. I think your question is interesting, and I wonder the response you would get from the students, because I do think that because, I mean, clearly there's visual diversity here at Temple, and I do think that some students might come and think, because I am at Temple, I am exposing myself to diversity and social justice and all of these things. And so when Rodney says that we need to challenge more, I think, we have within our departments, several huge programs, developed sort of, I guess, programs that we tried to put on, such as NCAV, such as Safe Zone, some of these other things where we do try to push that, because, I do think that you might get a different response from a student who says, yes, I feel like I'm learning a lot about diversity. My roommate, the person down the hall is from blah, 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 and I say hi to them all the time. And so, feeling like because I go to Temple that I have that exposure when it's really a little bit further than that. So I do think I see things, I see all the good programs and the different things that departments are doing to try to encourage that. I do think that, the lack of sort of the resource centers and things like that has an impact on the environment, but I feel like we can't fall on that anymore. Individual departments need to ingrain these types of practices and beliefs in their things. And I think we do that in the residence life, and we're striving to do better, but I also think that other departments in the division are doing that as well.
Thanks.